The lease on my studio apartment ends in 6 days, and I'm standing in the driveway of a house I just bought, holding a key that still has the realtor's tag on it, when my sister's minivan turns the corner onto my street. I know that minivan. I've been avoiding that minivan for 3 months. My stomach drops before my brain even catches up. My name is Megan. I'm 31 years old. I'm a pediatric occupational therapist working out of a clinic in Raleigh, North Carolina. And last Thursday, I closed on a 400 square foot house in a quiet neighborhood near the Greenway. 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a small backyard with a fig tree in the corner. I cried in my car in the parking lot of the title company after signing the paperwork. I cried because I did it by myself, because it took 8 years, because for most of those 8 years, people told me I was being unrealistic. My sister Adrienne is 3 years older than me. She married her husband Kenny when she was 24. They have 2 kids, a 7-year-old named Bryce and a 4-year-old named Cora. They rent a 3-bedroom apartment 20 minutes from where my parents live, and for the past year and a half, their landlord has been trying to sell the building. Adrienne has been talking about needing to move since before Cora was born. It's been a running theme at every holiday dinner, every phone call, every text thread where mom loops us all in together. I love my sister. I want to say that clearly, because nothing I'm about to tell you makes sense unless you understand that I genuinely love her, and she'd made what happened so much harder. The minivan parks in front of my house. Not in the driveway, in front of it, parallel to the curb, like they're planning to stay a while. My mom gets out of the passenger seat. Then Kenny. Then Adrienne. Then both kids stumble out of the side door with their backpacks on. Backpacks. Oh my gosh, look at it. My mum has her hands pressed to her cheeks. She's looking at my house the way someone looks at a house they're about to move into. I had made one mistake. 7 days earlier, the night my offer was accepted, I had been so overwhelmed with relief and excitement that I texted the family group chat. Just my parents, my sister, my grandmother. A photo of myself in the realtor's car, grinning like an idiot, with a caption that said, "I got the house." I included the address because my dad asked. He wanted to Google it. That was it. That was my mistake. What's going on? I looked at my sister. Why are you all here? We wanted to see it. She said it like it was obvious, like I should have expected this. Adrienne. I kept my voice steady. I just got the key an hour ago. I haven't even been inside yet. That's why we wanted to be here for it. She smiled, but there was something underneath the smile I couldn't read yet. Something a little too deliberate. My mom was already walking toward the front door. Come on, let's see it. I stood there for a second with my key in my hand, and I thought, this is fine. They're excited. Let them see it. You can set limits later. That's the thought process that gets people like me into trouble. That later instinct. I've had it my whole life. I opened the door. The house was empty, of course. Just hardwood floors and afternoon light, and that particular smell of a clean, freshly painted space that doesn't belong to anyone yet. I remember the sound of my own footsteps and thinking, this is mine. 20 seconds of that feeling. That's all I got before my mom said, from the hallway, this would actually work really well. I turned around. What would work? She and my sister were doing that thing. That silent conversation with their eyes that they've been doing my whole life. The one that excludes me. The one that means a decision has already been made and they're just figuring out the best way to present it. We've been talking, Adrienne said. She tucked her hair behind her ear, which is what she does when she's nervous about delivering news. Kenny and I have been really struggling with the apartment situation. The landlord sent another notice. They want everyone out by the 1st of next month. I know, I said. You've mentioned that. And this place, it's 3 bedrooms, Meg. You don't need 3 bedrooms. You're single. You're one person. The air in the room changed. We were thinking, she continued, that we could move in here with you. Just temporarily. 6 months maybe, until we figure out something permanent. You'd still have your own room, obviously. The kids could share the 3rd room. Kenny and I would take the master. That's my room. And we'd split the mortgage, whatever's fair. I looked at my mum. She was nodding like this was a perfectly reasonable proposal, like it had already been agreed upon somewhere in a meeting I hadn't been invited to. I grew up in Durham. My parents still live there, in the same house they've owned since 1997. My dad worked in logistics his whole career, and my mom was an office manager at a dental practice until she retired 2 years ago. We were comfortable growing up. Not wealthy, but stable. My sister and I both went to state schools. I graduated without debt because I worked all 4 years and lived with 3 roommates in a place that smelled like mildew and old carpet. I then spent 6 years in a studio apartment, driving a 10-year-old Civic, bringing lunch to work every single day. Not taking vacations, not upgrading my phone when it broke, watching every dollar that came in and every dollar that went out. I did that for 8 years so I could buy a house. Adrian and Kenny have 2 incomes. Adrian manages a dental office, different one from my mom's, and Kenny works in IT support. Their issue was never income. It was that they'd moved into an apartment above their means when they first got married and never adjusted, and now the lease situation was catching up to them. That is not my fault. I say that gently. I love them, but it is not my fault. I can't do that, I said. My mom's expression shifted. Megan, I didn't buy a 3-bedroom house so that I could share it. I bought it so I could have space. For the first time in my adult life, I'm going to have space and I'm not sharing it. It's just temporary. Adrian's voice got that particular edge it gets when she thinks I'm being difficult. You're acting like I'm asking you to give it up. I'm not. We'd be contributing to the mortgage. I already have a mortgage payment I can handle on my own. That's the whole point. I don't need your contribution. Kenny, to his credit, said nothing. He was standing slightly apart from everyone, looking at the hardwood floors, and I got the sense he hadn't been entirely on board with this plan from the start. Your sister needs help, my mum said. That's all this is. I understand that. And I'm sorry about the apartment situation. I genuinely am. But moving into my house is not the solution. Why not? I paused, because I couldn't believe I was being asked to justify this. I was standing in a home I had worked 8 years to purchase, that I had signed my name on 4 days ago, that I owned, and I was being asked to explain why I didn't want my sister's family of 4 to move into it. Because it's my home, I said. That's enough of a reason. My mom made a sound. Not quite a word. More like the vocalized version of you're being selfish. I've heard that sound my whole life, directed at me whenever I prioritize something for myself over something for the family. What came next was not a conversation. It was a performance, and I was the only one who hadn't seen the script. My sister started crying. Not the kind of crying that comes from real grief. I know what her real grief looks like. I've seen it, and I know it. This was the kind of crying that appears on cue to redirect an argument. My mom put her arm around her and looked at me like I was the one who had caused this. Kenny gathered up the kids who had been wandering through the empty rooms, oblivious, and took them back outside. After everything, my mom said, after everything this family has done for you, I could have said a lot of things in that moment. I could have made a list. I could have pointed out that I paid my own way through college while my parents co-signed Adrian's student loan, that they later had to partially cover when she fell behind on payments. I could have pointed out that when my car broke down 3 years ago, it was my own emergency fund that paid for the repair, not a family loan. I could have pointed out that I had never, not once in my adult life, asked this family for a financial cushion. I didn't say any of that. I said, I think you should go. My mom looked at me for a long moment. You're really going to do this? I'm not doing anything. I bought a house. You showed up without being invited and asked to move into it. Those are 2 separate things. She left. Adrian followed, not making eye contact with me as she passed. I heard the minivan doors, the engine, and then quiet. Standing in my empty living room with the afternoon light shifting across the floor, I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for an hour. Then I sat down on the floor with my back against the wall and I thought, is there any version of this where I'm wrong? I did that thing that people like me do. I ran through every angle. I considered their position. I thought about the kids' backpacks. I thought about my niece and nephew sharing a room. I thought about whether a person who has space is morally required to share it with family in need. I sat there for about 15 minutes. And then I texted my best friend Petra and told her everything. Her response was immediate. Change your locks before they get a copy of that key made. I almost laughed. Then I thought about it. The realtor had handed me 2 keys at closing, standard. I had those 2 keys, but my mom had been standing right beside me when I opened the door for the first time. And my mom has a history, a long, documented, family acknowledged history of making herself at home in spaces she doesn't own. I called a locksmith that afternoon. I wish I could say that was the end of it, that they pushed once, I held the line, and they accepted it. I wish this were a shorter story. 2 days later, my dad called me. He hadn't been there that afternoon. He'd been at a doctor's appointment, and his approach was different from my mum's, softer, more reasonable. He asked if I'd really thought it through, whether I understood how serious the apartment situation was, whether I understood how hard it was for Adrian to ask for help. I told him I did understand. I told him the answer was still no. He didn't push hard. I think he knew on some level that asking me to open my home to 4 additional people against my will wasn't actually reasonable. He just felt like he had to try. My mom called 3 times over the next week. I let 2 of those go to voicemail. The third time I answered, and she spent 11 minutes. I watched the timer on my phone, telling me about family and obligation, and how I'd feel when I was older, and understood what it meant to really need people, and how one day I would be the one who needed something. I listened. When she was done, I said, "I love you." The answer is still no. I hope Adrian and Kenny find something soon. What I didn't know, what I found out 9 days after that first afternoon in my house, is that it hadn't been just a question. I got an email from my credit monitoring service, the kind that says, "A new inquiry has appeared on your credit report." I'd set up alerts years ago when I was in the middle of saving for the house, and I'd never had a false alarm before. I clicked through. A hard inquiry. A mortgage application. I had never applied for a mortgage other than the one I just closed on. I went cold. I called the lender. It took me 40 minutes and 2 transfers to get to a person with enough access to tell me anything. What I eventually pieced together was this. Someone had submitted a pre-approval application for a property purchase using my social security number and my income documentation. The application had my name on it as a co-borrower. The primary borrowers were my sister and her husband. They had done it without telling me, without asking me, without my signature, or rather, with something that was supposed to look like my signature. I hung up the phone and sat completely still for a moment. Then I called Petra again. Then I called a lawyer, a real estate attorney I'd worked with during my own closing, who referred me to someone who handles financial fraud. Then I placed a fraud alert on my credit with all 3 bureaus. Then I called the lender back and told them formally, on record, that I had not authorized this application and had not signed any co-borrower agreement. The woman I spoke to got very quiet and very careful with her words and told me that my statement had been noted. The property in the application was a $450,000 house in the same part of Raleigh where my parents live. 4 bedrooms. Adrian and Kenny could not have qualified for it on their own. Their debt-to-income ratio, based on what I knew of their finances, wouldn't support that mortgage. They had apparently decided that using my income and my credit, without telling me, was a reasonable workaround. I want to be precise here, because I think precision matters. This is a federal crime. Using someone's personal financial information to apply for a loan without their consent is identity theft and mortgage fraud. That is not a family disagreement. That is not a boundary issue. That is a crime. I didn't call my sister first. I know some people in my position would have. I know the instinct is to give family a chance to explain, to confirm there's been a misunderstanding, to hear their side. I didn't do that. I called the lawyer first, and the lawyer told me exactly what my options were, and then I called my sister. The call lasted 4 minutes. She didn't deny it. That surprised me more than almost anything else. She said they'd just been trying to figure out what was possible. She said they thought I would have said yes if they'd asked properly. She said I was making it into a bigger deal than it was. I said, "You used my social security number without my consent to apply for a mortgage." She said, "We didn't think you'd find out." I have thought about those 6 words many times since. We didn't think you'd find out. Not we thought you wouldn't mind. Not we were going to ask you. The acknowledgement, built right into the sentence, that they knew it was something I would have objected to. They just hoped the mechanism of discovery wouldn't be triggered. I told her I had already spoken to a lawyer and placed fraud alerts on my credit. I told her the lender had been notified. I told her that what happened next was going to depend on what the lawyer advised. Then I ended the call. My parents found out that evening. My mom called me screaming. I mean, that literally screaming, in a way I haven't heard from her since I was maybe 16. She wanted to know how I could do this to my own family. She wanted to know if I understood what this meant for Adrian. She said I was vindictive. She said I was punishing my sister for a mistake. She said I had always been like this, always had to be right, always had to win. I let her go for a while. Then I said, Mom, your daughter used my personal financial information to commit mortgage fraud. I didn't do anything to her. She did something to me. She hung up. The next few weeks were among the hardest of my life, and not because of anything the legal process put me through. The lawyer was clear and methodical and made me feel like things were under control. The hard part was the family. My aunt called me. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in 2 years called me. My grandmother, who was 81 years old and should not have been pulled into this, called me crying, asking if there was any way to handle it quietly. I understood where they were coming from. I did. But I also understood that handling it quietly meant absorbing the consequences of what my sister did without holding her accountable, and I had spent too many years absorbing things quietly. My lawyer and I ultimately decided not to pursue criminal charges. That was my choice. No one pressured me either way. What we did do was require Adrian and Kenny to sign a formal acknowledgement of what had occurred and an agreement to pay for the legal fees I'd incurred addressing it. We also required them to send a written retraction to the lender. It wasn't nothing. It wasn't prison. I don't know if it was enough. What I know is that the fraud alert did its job. My credit was not damaged. The application went nowhere. My house is still mine, exactly as it was the day I got that key. My relationship with my sister has not recovered. I don't know if it will. We haven't spoken since that 4-minute phone call. My mom and I have a version of a relationship. We talk occasionally about surface things, with a careful distance that wasn't there before. My dad checks in on me more than he used to. I think he's ashamed in the quiet way some parents carry shame for things their children do. Petra helped me paint my living room the weekend after the legal piece was resolved. We used a warm sage green I'd been looking at for months. We ordered pizza and sat on the floor on a drop cloth, and I told her the whole story from beginning to end, and she listened to all of it. And when I was done, she said, "You did everything right." I don't know if that's entirely true. I've turned it over enough times to know there are things I could have done differently. Called my sister sooner, been more direct earlier in the process, not shared the address in the group chat. But I don't think I did anything wrong. I think those are different categories. I think about that comment I saw in a video once, about how people who expect free housing are the generous ones, and yet somehow the person who earned the thing being demanded gets labeled selfish. I felt that my whole life in ways I didn't have language for until recently. Last month, I planted a vegetable garden in the small patch of dirt beside my back fence. Tomatoes, basil, 2 kinds of peppers. I don't know what I'm doing yet. I've killed a plant before by looking at it wrong, but there's something about putting something in the ground in a place that is yours and watching to see if it grows. The fig tree in the corner of the yard bloomed in April. I didn't do anything to make that happen. It was already there, already rooted, and it bloomed because that's what it does when it's in its own place and no one disturbs it. I think about that sometimes. There's a fig tree in my backyard that I didn't plant. It was already there when I moved in, already rooted before I ever signed my name on that deed. It bloomed in April without any help from me. And I keep coming back to that image because I think it's the most honest way I know to describe what I've learned from all of this. Some things grow because they're finally in the right place, not because someone rescued them, not because they forced their way into someone else's space, because they found ground that was theirs and they stayed in it. When Adrian showed up that afternoon with her kids' backpacks and her family of 4 and an assumption that my home was a problem she could solve with my resources, she wasn't acting out of cruelty. I've had to sit with that. She was acting out of a pattern that our family had reinforced for years, that my things were available, that my sacrifices were background noise, that my no was just a starting point for negotiation. That pattern didn't start the day she showed up at my door. It started long before I ever had a door to protect. And the thing I've had to reckon with is that I participated in it too. Every time I said yes when I meant no. Every time I absorbed something quietly because making noise felt more costly than the thing I was absorbing, I trained people around me to expect my compliance. And then I was surprised when they counted on it for something this large. What changed wasn't just that I said no. It was that I understood, maybe for the first time in my adult life, that saying no was not a moral failure. Protecting what I had built was not selfishness. Integrity isn't just about how you treat other people, it's about whether you treat yourself with the same basic honesty. I had been ethical in every direction except inward. The fraud alert was the moment everything clarified. When I saw that inquiry on my credit report, I didn't feel rage exactly. I felt something colder and steadier, a kind of clarity that I think only arrives when you finally understand what you're actually dealing with. They had hoped I wouldn't find out. That sentence told me everything I needed to know about whether my feelings about the situation mattered to them. What I did next, calling the lawyer before I called my sister, placing the alerts, documenting everything, wasn't revenge. It was what competence looks like when you finally decided to apply it to your own life. I had been organized and strategic and persistent about everything except standing up for myself. I had the tools. I just hadn't used them in this direction before. I think about the 8 years, the packed lunches, the studio apartment, the Civic with the cracked dashboard. I don't romanticize it. It was genuinely hard, and there were months that were grinding and lonely. But I held on because I understood something that I couldn't have articulated at 23, that the only way through difficulty is to stay in it long enough that it becomes something. That endurance without direction is just suffering, but endurance towards something real is how a person builds a life that belongs to them. My house is still mine. The sage green living room, the fig tree, the backyard where my tomatoes are coming in slow but steady. Petra came over last weekend, and we sat on the back steps and didn't talk about any of this. And that felt like its own kind of answer. I don't know what happens with my sister. I don't know what happens with my mom. I know that some fractures take longer to assess than to cause, and I'm still in the middle of that. What I know for certain is that I am not willing to go back to being the person who absorbed things quietly. That version of me built this house. This version of me is going to live in it.